Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event for the Intellectual Forum here at Jesus College. And thank you so much for being with us here in person in this lovely Frankopan Hall, or wherever in the world you are. We get people from literally around the world. We've had almost every country have at least somebody come to one of our events, so it's really good to have you here. Jesus College has an amazing history. We've been around originally as a nunnery since 1144 and became a college of the University of Cambridge in 1496. So that's 880-something years of people thinking and reflecting about the world and what's happening. The Intellectual Forum was set up 10 years ago to try to make sure that we could communicate that more from within our college to the rest of Cambridge and around the rest of the world. And over the almost 10 years, we have had some amazing people come here and speak about all sorts of topics, from environmental sustainability to fashion and much, much, much else. We try to do some lighter topics and some rather less light but important topics. And I think tonight's is more on the less light but extremely important events. We've had a number of events that have actually looked in slightly different ways at human rights and some of the things that are happening in Russia in particular. We've done some work, for example, with the Moscow Times, running a couple of events here, including what I thought was an amazing event looking at artists against the Kremlin and how art can be used to try to highlight some of the problems that are happening. But tonight I'm really, really delighted to have an utterly stellar speaker, and Olga will be speaking shortly about the mirror argument and how human rights are being used against themselves. But firstly, I'd like to introduce, in order to welcome Olga, one of the star students here at Jesus College. Irina Aledasheva has done an amazing number of things. I remember interviewing you and being slightly surprised just how many things you have done. You've studied in many, many countries, you've studied many things, you've worked on human rights, you've worked on neuroscience and neurotech, and over this summer, fantastically for us, Irina will be doing an internship with the Intellectual Forum, very much looking at what we're going to talk about tonight. Irina, thank you very much for introducing Olga to us, to bring her here, and to being such a stellar student at Jesus College. So, Irina, over to you.
I hope you can hear me all right. And it is a great privilege to me to welcome Olga Sadovskaya here. And it's especially great because I am her fangirl and she's been my superhero ever since I was a kid. And I'm really, really grateful for Intellectual Forum for hosting her here. And why she was my superhero? Well, I still remember the day when I was a teenager when I learned that torture is real, as in not some long-standing historic relic that has disappeared in the Middle Ages, but is actually happening now in 21st centuries. Moreover, it is happening in my own country. And I didn't want to believe that, but growing up and realizing that my own country is actively involved in war, in repressions, and my own friends have suffered political persecution, this reality, those matters, they didn't just become more urgent, because they always were urgent, they became much more real to me personally. And this is why people like Olga are so inspiring and are so needed in this world, because as a vice chair of the Crew Against Torture, a Russian NGO that was fighting for 20 years protecting the interests of torture survivors, she has investigated and defended people who were subjected to torture, who were disappeared with mysterious circumstances, who were killed extrajudicially. And she has worked with the United Nations and with the European Council, and she has brought many, many cases before the European Court of Justice. So she helped for the voices of those who might have never been heard to sound proudly and strongly, and for them to receive justice. And also Olga is a scholar and an educator, and she's a fellow at the Human Rights Institute at the Colby College in Maine, so one of our colleagues in a way. And her work was recognized. She was shortlisted for the Nobel Peace Prize, but I admire her not for all those awards, but for her empathy, for her courage, and for her unwavering commitment to doing what is right, despite the circumstances getting worse and worse every year. So please give a warm welcome to Olga Sadovskaya.
Thank you, Irina. That's amazing to hear about yourself. So many good words, and thank you all for coming here. Hopefully, you're not here only because of the beer after the lecture, but but for the cause. I came actually from Russia, and that's a rare thing now because most of the human rights defenders are now living and functioning from exile. I still live in the country. We still are doing field investigations and litigation in national courts. And despite the fact that I have been working with international mechanisms primarily and with European Court of Human Rights, I still believe that the most interesting things are happening in the small regional courts where the fight for justice begins. I'm not going to talk today about my work on torture cases because it's a narrow topic, it's not really interested for everyone, and it could be elaborated in case Irina's colleagues wants to continue cooperation. But here I want to talk more broadly about the fight that human rights are facing right now, because I think that since the end of the Second World War, we are entering an era where human rights are not clear and independent values anymore. Human rights are used, the paradigm and the arguments of human rights are now used against human rights as such. And I think that it now is important to talk about the mirror arguments and the situation when human rights do have to survive being weaponized against themselves by the same wording of human rights as they are created to protect. My career started 25 years ago in the city of Nizhny Novgorod after I finished Amsterdam University and get back to Russia to work with human rights with the case of Alexei Mikheyev. That's the first case that was solved by the European Court of Human Rights regarding Russia and torture in custody and state-owned violence. And this was the first example. I didn't realize it at that time, but now I do see that for me it was the first example where human rights were used against human rights. Alexei Mikheyev was a young road police officer, and he was accused in raping and murder of the girl. He was giving a lift to her at night from a club to somewhere, to another place of the city, and she disappeared. And she's gone missing even after 3 days after he gave her a lift, and he was arrested. And in sake of prevention, or in the sake of getting justice for that girl presumably raped and killed by him, he was severely tortured. He was severely tortured for 10 days. He made a decision to give a confession, to describe how he raped her, how he killed her, and where he buried her, the only problem that they couldn't find the body. And at the end of the 10th day, he couldn't survive tortures anymore and jumped out of the window because the torture was so awful that it was impossible to live through it anymore. He broke his spine. He can't walk anymore since 2000. He uses wheelchair. He's still alive, fortunately, mainly thanks to the efforts of the Norwegian doctors. But at the end of the 10th day, girl got back home, healthy and happy. She was just somewhere with the friends. And the reason for torturing Alexei was the reason of protecting her, or finding her, or saving justice for her, because the authorities presumed that she was raped and killed with no proof that it happened. But this is how for me, this is how the story of using human rights against human rights has started. And for 25 years, I personally have been asking a question in the court, during investigation, during supporting victims process, are the rights of the particular person were violated? In some cases, yes, in some cases, no. But this was the question I was asking for many, many years, actually for decades. But today, I feel that we are facing a much harder question. What happens when the violation is committed in the language of the right itself? And how could we overcome that argument that some human rights are more important than the others? And there are some models of weaponization of the human rights, and there are models of how, using the same wording and the same arguments, different states and authorities are diminishing one portion of human rights in favor of another portion of human rights. And there are three main models of weaponization that are used all around the globe. Sometimes I will use Russian examples, sometimes other countries, but actually the bad thing is that big countries and smaller countries are learning from each other, but unfortunately, in many cases, they tend to learn bad things, but not to copy good things. And that's, I can't tell that this is progress, and I don't have any recipe how to overcome that. But what we see from the things that are happening globally is that bad examples are much more encouraging for other countries than the good examples. Maybe because doing bad things are taking less efforts. We don't know. Or maybe they feel that doing bad things are safer for them. But still, one main model of weaponization of human rights against themselves is sovereignty used as a shield for human rights violations. That we could hear everywhere, but especially in the rooms of UN palaces around the world. I've been to New York presenting the results of the investigations of human rights violations at UN General Assembly. I've been many times in Geneva presenting the same results of investigations. And there is a huge and very beautiful rooms where all the delegations come, and majority of the delegations say, when they're addressed with the human rights violations, that this is not the question that the country is ready to discuss, because we stand at the position of non-interference in internal affairs. But not always that happens internally in the country is their internal thing, is their internal policy. And the human rights are something global, but still, at the UN Human Rights Council, sitting at many presentations of the reports made by US, made by Guatemala, made by Russia, made by Canada and many other countries, I constantly hear that this is our internal question. What we do with our own citizens, or maybe sometimes with the other citizens, but still inside the country. This is aggravated in the regions where there are no international mechanisms available for people, and there are very big regions. If we speak, for example, about Council of Europe, where we are now, and UK is the member of the Council of Europe, we have perfect regional and the most effective instrument in the world, actually, that protects human rights is European Court of Human Rights. But this is just 46 countries, because Russia was expelled and it was a 47th country. But around all the countries, nearly 140 countries recognized universally by UN, and nearly 20 countries and territories that are not recognized by all the international quorum. Many of them are deprived of this, and many citizens of many even big and developed and democratic countries are deprived of this. For example, US and Canada has never signed and ratified a single international convention that allows investigation or delivering judgments on human rights violations in these countries, despite the fact that they were promoting Inter-American Convention of Human Rights, and many countries in Latin America have signed this convention. There are very good examples of judgments there. But the biggest democratic countries have not allowed anyone to judge how they respect human rights on their own territories. And Russia is now joining the club. The enhanced interrogation framework that appeared after 9/11, and you could find a lot of YouTube interviews from the people who were developing the tactics and the mechanisms of non-violent interrogation, mainly aimed at securing the situation where the traces of torture could be found on the body. But this is a very torturous thing that have been done to people suspected in terrorism. This is also a bad example that are now used around the world. The pattern is that we see now is that international human rights architecture was built on the premise that sovereignty adds values to the human rights, adds protection to the human rights, that human rights should be protected on the national level. And in the majority of the constitution, it is written like this, that human rights are respected, torture is torture is prohibited, capital punishment is not allowed, discrimination is not what we aim for, and all the things are created in the national constitutions. But in reality, the mirror argument reverses this situation. And the state wants and do a lot of efforts to present human rights as an obstacle of fighting for other human rights. I believe many of you have read Animal Farm by George Orwell. And those who have not, that's my recommendation, because that's the very right period of reading that. And this is what illustrates the behavior of the many authorities around the globe. It's like all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than the others. And that's what we see, for example, in anti-terrorist cases. More than a year ago, we in Moscow had a huge terrorist attack in a concert hall. A lot of people have died. And then we have seen on federal TV how those terrorists, I don't have any doubts that they have committed that. They're criminals. They deserve responsibility. But what was shown on our federal TV is how they were tortured. Their ears were cut off. They were severely beaten. Some of them arrived to the courtroom in the wheelchairs because they couldn't walk after arrest. And this is what we see. Some rights are more important than the others. And the human rights of some people are not so important as human rights of the others. And this is what we see every time. Like in the documents, everything is clear and everything is available for everyone, but no, that's not true. The human rights of police officers, for example, as people, are more important than the human rights of their victims. And this is the way how the human rights are weaponized against themselves, actually. Counterterrorism, as I told you, I already mentioned it, but this is the second model of weaponization. Anti-extremist legislation have been built in many countries. In Russia, for example, anti-extremist legislation is used to prosecute Jehovah's Witnesses. We have dozens of people arrested under anti-extremism laws for that. Just yesterday, there is a huge human rights organization mainly functioning now in exile that is called Over the Info, and it helps people who were subjected to prosecution because of taking participation in public protests, in going out to the street peacefully. They were declared extremists because they speak against the war. And in Russia, there is a new tendency that people are subjected to different number of years of imprisonment under anti-extremist law. But the map is really broader. It's not only Russia, and the people and the governments do learn from themselves. For example, we see the same in Egypt. And in China, Xinjiang counterterrorism regulation has absolutely the same grammar as the Russian anti-extremist regulation, just the region is different. And just the topics that trigger the government are different. But the way the anti-extremist legislation is used is the same, because governments tend to name attempt to get more freedom as extremism. And this is what we also see around the globe, and it's becoming more and more widespread. And here the key point is that the legal instrument as such is not broken. The laws are there, the courts are there, the accusations are there, the hearing are there, the attorneys are in the courtrooms. But it has been mirrored. The content and the meaning of human rights is inverted. And the human rights are now served as the ground for bringing people to justice because they tend to violate anti-extremist legislation while they don't. And another, I think this is the most dangerous mechanism that actually exists, because those two before are used by the governments, because only governments have instruments to do that. Counterterrorism legislation and bringing cases to court is only what the governments could do. Speaking about sovereignty with the legal grounds is only what governments could do. But the third and the most important and the most dangerous thing is a thing that is called whataboutism, and I need to switch on the video. But we can skip that. Well, we're all adults here. We know what we know what it is. And the classic shift about whataboutism is the language that we use. Yes, but, and this is what is used everywhere. Yes, capital punishment is unacceptable, but we in Israel try to have a law that allows to kill terrorists, because that's to save the lives of the others. And absolutely, yes, there is an absolute ban on torture, but sometimes it's necessary to use violence to save someone's life. That's a ticking bomb case. That's a very popular formula for those who say that torture is absolutely unacceptable, but in some cases it is, because we need to do something when we have complicated tasks. And this is another case that I want to relate to you. This is absolutely good example of German whataboutism that was challenged by European Court of Human Rights. The case is called Gafgen against Germany. And Gafgen was subjected to torture. Gafgen was not a very nice guy in comparison with Alexei from the first slide. He is a criminal. He was a law student, very poor law student, and very jealous about someone else's money. And he actually kidnapped a kid of his professor. You know, that professor was quite rich, they were capable of paying money, and police actually believed that boy was still alive, and they tortured Gafgen to make him confess and show the place where the kid was kept. By the moment he was tortured, the kid was already dead, because his initial intention was to get money from the professor, but then he changed his mind and he killed the kid even before asking for money. The German court said, well, Gafgen complained about torture in the court when there was a trial against him. And the German court said, well, yes, the ban on torture is absolute. We have ratified European Convention, and we have that in our constitution. But this case is now outstanding. And you know, without all these testimonies that we extracted from Gafgen under torture, we can't deliver a verdict. So in this case, torture was acceptable. Otherwise, we don't have any evidences. Because all the other evidences that were found were based on all the evidences that were found after, the places where where the car was left, where the kid was found. Everything has become known only after confession received while the torture was applied. Gavgen went to European Court of Human Rights, and European Court said that, well, we are extremely sorry, but the ban is an absolute thing, and nobody could be tortured. And there was a huge discussion in media, in the legal society, that here there is a real ticking bomb case. You know that there is somewhere a hostage kept, and if you don't get this information quickly, you are not able to save. Or there is, like, classical ticking bomb example is there is a shopping center and there are 3,000 people in there, and we know there is a bomb, and we know that it will explode in a couple of hours, but we don't know anything about the bomb, where it is, how it will explode. So we take those people whom we suspect in putting the bomb in the shopping center, and we torture them quickly to get the information. It sounds logical. You have just a little time left and you need to get the information. But the mistake with the ticking bomb case is that in reality it never happened. And actually in the reality it couldn't exist. Because if you have so much information about the fact that bomb will explode, it means that either you are able to get all the rest of information to find where is it, or you are faking the information, approving the use of torture. Because if you know that these people have bought everything they need for the bomb, they created the bomb, they bring it to the shopping center, you know that it will explode in a couple of hours, so how did it happen that you don't know the last point if you know everything about the situation? That's the lack of normal investigation. And this is not the reason why you should use torture. So that is a very important thing, and the case of ticking bomb will be discussed all over ages, because people tend to say that it's better to torture than to save people than not to torture and not save people. But in reality, ticking bomb case never happened in any country. We don't know the examples of that. But the new version of Whataboutism is more sophisticated, and that what I was telling is it colonizes good ideas in the sake of bad intentions. So, for example, Russia was adopting a foreign agent law declaring everybody who is bringing, I don't know, Western values, human rights values, everything from the West, and explaining that it is very painful for the Russian government because it influences politics not in the correct way, and they were using as a good example the FARA Act, that actually absolutely different thing in the US, that puts ban actually on foreign lobbying, but it's not what Russia is doing with its foreign agent inside the country. And this kind of whataboutism is also used not only by the society and not also by the people, but also by the governments. Yes, we do something bad, but they also do. They do something we like, and we will also do that. And this is quite a dangerous thing, because sometimes the good ideas are taken and changed to such extent that when they're coming to the country that is bringing them into practice, they start to serve the bad ideas and the bad intentions. And moreover, being very popular and being promoted through different media, TV, radio, the whataboutism like this, yes, but with him is something wrong, it legitimizes and it supports passive reaction to human rights violations. Because what states tend to do is to develop the lack of reaction to the human rights violation, because yes, that's a violation, but Maybe he deserves it. Maybe he's not a very good person. Maybe he's a theft. Maybe, and well, you imagine. I mean, you have better imagination than me, I'm sure, and you can imagine a lot of examples how yes but no works in reality. And why? I have to. Yeah. What the time is? Okay. And why it is more dangerous, actually? Because we have been living through the years of hypocrisy. And this is, and this was the part of our everyday life, because, well, hypocrisy is much less dangerous thing than this way of weaponization of human rights against themselves, because hypocrisy is something that acknowledges that there is a norm, a standard, and denies that the norm was violated. So that's a normal defense in a criminal case, as an illustration, because hypocrisy doesn't say that torture is in the sake of something good and torture is acceptable. Hypocrisy says that it looks like when the torturer says, yes, the torture is bad, but you falsely accused me in torture because I didn't commit it. He doesn't put a question mark on the norm and on the standard, but he tries to prove that he is not there. He has not violated the norm. But the mirror argument is something that is more dangerous. It's structurally different because it occupies the norm. It creates the new norm and says that there is a new norm and we follow that, and this is okay. This is okay, bombing neighboring country, because we're not invading, we're protecting. What the fuck you're protecting in the neighboring country? And this is what I see now every day. Because in the comparison with the hypocrisy arguments and time, they doesn't say we didn't torture. They say what you call torture is what we call counterterrorism. So it's something good. You are mistakenly naming it torture. You are mistakenly naming it aggression. This is a special military operation. You mistakenly name it, I don't know, freedom of speech. This is extremism. And this is what actually ruins and poisons the society. Because when the authority is bringing the norm to the society, they actually they are planting the crack in the society, because there will always be those who stand at the normal norm and who try to promote the new norm. And the norm, it's not denied in the mirror argument, it's captured. It's really an attempt to say that the truth, that the lie is truth, that the war is peace. And we're coming back to Orwell, to another book, but this is how it works in the nowadays. Like Russian MFA says, we are not kidnapping kids, we're saving them from violations. This is very good. I mean, it sounds great. You're saving kids. And this is how the new norm is presented. And the society tend to believe, or tend to choose to believe, because it's easier than to challenge the new norm, than to challenge the truth, than to think what was in reality, what is proved, how it was created and committed. And when I started to work as the lawyer, my life was much more easy 25 years ago, because there was no mirror argument at that time. They were not so widespread. There was a norm. And we were arguing about if he has violated the norm or not, if the crime existed or was committed or not. But we were not arguing about what is the norm, what is normal in our society. We had standards. And we were having debates about if the standard is correct, or if the standard is violated, or if this kind of treatment could be recognized as torture, or this is degrading treatment because the level of violence is not reached. But we're not discussing the norms as such. Here, I'm very sorry for the for the lawyers who are coming to the courts right now, because they're challenging absolutely. Their challenges are outstanding, because they're challenging the new reality that is not normal. And yes, and this is also like a victim blaming. I mean, why you are complaining? That's done by you, or nothing has happened. And this way of denial the legal standards and norm is actually the ruins the legal profession in many countries. It ruined legal profession in Russia. It ruined legal profession in Egypt. It ruined legal profession in India. It ruins legal profession in Turkey, because this challenging norms is widespread. And when I talk with colleagues that work with human rights cases and with torture cases all around the countries, they're really suffering, because now they are not having a task to prove that this has happened. They're having a task to prove that what has happened is not normal, because the authorities say that it is. And that's an outstanding task for the future generation, unfortunately, and for us as well. And I think, so I mean, the logical question is what to do. but I think that this is still a lot could be done. And I think there are also three main things that could be, can those human rights can be reclaimed actually? What could be done in fighting for real and normal and adequate human rights in the nowadays world? And actually, there are also three mechanisms that I think might be relevant and would be relevant. One is, I think, and it's time actually to back to basics and to make it as simple as possible and not to be too sophisticated, because we have to start with the scratch with the human rights standards. And one method is stubbornness of the evidence. Istanbul Protocol, I don't have on the slide, but those who don't know, you could Google. Istanbul Protocol is the UN mechanism that was developed by 100 doctors and lawyers. And I have pleasure of being one of those 100 authors of the Istanbul Protocol. This is a universal mechanism created by UN for investigation of torture violations around the globe. This is a universal way of investigating torture despite the laws of the country. And the evidentiary stubbornness is a counter-weapon, because this protocol works precisely because it established facts that are hard to mirror. Because if you establish tremors, physical findings, psychological sequelae, consistency analysis, you can mirror the language of rights, but you can't mirror the traces of traumas. You can't mirror properly documented scar, bruise, or brain concussion. And this is why documentation under repression matters so much, and this is why it's so important that those human rights organizations that function in authoritarian regimes stay inside the country to collect and investigate human rights crimes. Because from the exile you can't collect evidences. And this is a very important task that we stick to, being inside the country. Because it's not sometimes also for litigation because of the malfunctioning of the judicial system, but it's because you have to fix the proof, you have to fix the facts, and you can't mirror an argument of a broken leg, because there is a broken leg. And this is very important. As many evidences as could be collected is important in all disclosed countries. And the mirror arguments is also could be challenged by the coalitions that are built by different organizations around the globe, challenging the arguments of their countries. There are a lot of globally created organizations that fight for different human rights, like Global Anti-Slavery Movement, World Organization Against Torture, Global Index on Prison Freedom or Freedom of Press. All these huge coalitions are actually built on the same standards. While all the countries challenge the norms, the human rights coalitions around the globe can speak all together and say, hey, the norm is still there and the norm is still that. And this is very important because making the voice louder and bringing it to the international level helps in many countries and in many situations. It helps to change political prisoners. It helps sometimes to release political prisoners. It helps to cut the funding for the country that is not respecting human rights, and this is a mechanism that is used, for example, within European Union, depending on domestic violence index. And this is also an important way of targeting the attempts of the state to challenge the human rights. And also important thing is naming the mere argument as it is, naming the grammar, and the public communication and the simple education of people. It's critical thinking, I guess, to recognize, teaching the people how to recognize the structure of mere argument. Explaining them not the sophisticated laws, legal regimes, protocols, and legal structures, but explaining them how the mirror argument works and how you can see that you are dealing with the mirror argument. Social media, ironic humor around that helps because it helps people to remember and helps people to recognize what is mirror argument. And this is no need absolutely to go into sophisticated discussions, to use complicated legal terms, to overbook people with the words they don't understand, that teaching them how to understand and to see the mirror argument and how to make humor out of it. Because all these things are really afraid of humor. All the authoritarian governments are afraid of humor. And teaching people to recognize that, this is very important. And I think we're coming to an end, so you could have a chance to answer some questions. And I mean, the answer to the question that I started with is, can human rights survive being weaponized against themselves? Is, of course I want to say yes, but no. The answer is that it's not automatically, and it could be done without a cost. The human rights needs better protection. And I think we actually, after the end of the Second World War, have forgotten how much have been paid for the human rights and how much was invested in the development of human rights standards. Because I actually was astonished by a research that was done 2 years ago in the Netherlands. And I'm very attached to that country because I finished University of Amsterdam. And there was a research done among people from the age of 25 to 40. And one of the questions was, do you think that that democracy is worth fighting for? And more than 33% answered no, because they were never fighting for democracy in the Netherlands, being at the age of 30. Their parents, their previous generation have fought for that, but not them. And maybe coming to the era of wars and aggression, as we see now in our region and in other regions, maybe this is the only way to make us understand that the human rights is something that needs to be protected, and we're too stupid to understand it without another war. But I think that it's very important to say that it's not given automatically, and human rights are not given automatically, and we have to invest our efforts to protect what we had and what we are losing right now. And I want to finish with the quote of Robert Kennedy, who actually said that each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve a lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny rope of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. And that's what we are trying to do in Russia and in many other authoritarian countries, being human rights defenders, not in exile yet. Thank you so much. If you have any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Olga, for an incredibly powerful, chilling talk. I hope there were some ripples of hope there, and that the act of talking about this is part of that ripple of hope. But some very, very powerful things there. We do have time for questions. If you have a question in the room, please do put your hand up. If you're online, please do raise it using Q&A. I'll try to bring them in. Can we start off at roughly at the line where you are at the moment? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was very thought-provoking listening to you today. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm gathering that a big source of problems in modern-day international law and law in general is the fact that there is so much reconsideration and re-evaluation of the norms that we used to stick to. You talked about how different countries and, I guess, entities of smaller scale can learn bad things from each other, but and this is probably a way of propagating this re-evaluation, but I was wondering if you think there was something specific that set it off at some point, or if it was just a random thing, or if it's a sign of times, this tendency that's happening currently.
I think, well, to the first part of your question, is that norms are challenged. This is one of the reasons, but another reason is that international instruments have become less powerful and less influential over the countries that commit a huge number of human rights violations, because all these international instruments, mainly based within UN structure, are built on the will of those countries who have joined the club of the outstanding violators. And all this structure is actually based now on the biggest countries or the more powerful countries in the world, and nearly half of them is actually entered the era where they don't care for human rights. And this actually ruins the power of UN. And yeah, unfortunately, being an international lawyer, I feel how the law is actually squeezing through the hands, because it's not working anymore on national and international level, and we have to do something with that. Regarding what actually triggered that, there were a number of triggers. If we speak about post-Soviet region, the Chechen wars have triggered that. If we speak about global influence, 9/11 and the reaction after 9/11 has triggered that. If we speak about MENA region, Lebanon and war in Lebanon has triggered that. So I can't say that there is only one reason why it started, but every action aggravates the next action, and they are coincidentally uniting in one tendency supported by other countries, because it's how it works. It's how it is the rule of the broken window. If none of the windows are broken in the block of flats, usually nothing happens. But if one window is broken, in a couple of weeks we will see all the windows broken, because if he can I can. That's how it works.
Fantastic. Can we then go right at the very, very back, sort of behind you, and then we'll do the person in red after that. Yeah.
Actually, it hasn't changed, because it was a lot of discussion around that, but none of the articles of the Russian constitution related to international law have been changed. Nothing happened in there. There were changes related to the terms of the president, elections, and all the things, but there was one Article 15 that says that the national laws should be built and used in accordance with international standards with the respect of sovereignty. So the text of the constitution in this part has not changed, but the law enforcement practice has changed. It's how you read the sentence, where you put the pressure in the sentence. So now the pressure is not on the respect of international standards and treaties, but with the respect of sovereignty. That's it.
So, question over there. I've seen a number of.
Thank you. There's some people researching, I think it's in Liverpool or Manchester, into interrogation techniques, who maintain that torture is not necessary. Skilled interrogation can achieve the truth, whereas with torture, some people say what they think you expect them to say. You may get misleading information. Now, I don't know what sort of skills training is necessary to become a competent, humane interrogator, an effective one, but clearly, and I don't know what timescale would require to carry out an interrogation, because clearly in your ticking bomb situation of 2 hours to get the right skilled person in place and enough time to interrogate is unrealistic. But it seems to me that that's the way we ought to go. I mean, I presume countries don't want the truth to come out, and that's in their interest that it shouldn't come out.
That is the non-violent interrogation technique. It was actually developed by Norwegian investigators. And then there was some kind of adaptation in other countries. The non-violent interrogation is really a great technique with the respect of human dignity, and it gives results. But what is more important is not that some sophisticated people have invented non-violent interrogation technique, but another finding that I really admire, because it's not a finding by a lawyer or human rights activist or anyone related to human rights. There is a Trinity College in Dublin, and there is a great professor named Shane O'Mara, and he's a neurobiologist. And a couple of years ago, he has published a great book that is called Why Torture Doesn't Work. And he's not speaking about torture from the idealistic point of view, from the humanitarian point of view, from the human rights standards. He doesn't care at all about that. He's a neurobiologist. And he explains why torture doesn't work, because human's body doesn't work like this, like the investigators want to work. Because what torture makes the victim is to say what interrogator wants him to say, but not the truth. And this is one of the main arguments as well. If you want to torture, presuming that you will get the truth, that is not true. You will get what interrogator wants to hear, but not the truth. And regarding the ticking case bomb, that is broader situation. So we can look at the case like this, in the circle, like this is the case, these are 2 hours we have, and we have to find out the truth. But this is not the life. Life is much bigger, and the life is bigger, and the communication with the society and community is bigger. And when the community has trust towards police would know in advance that somebody is buying something for the bomb, that somebody is parking the car, that somebody is going there, that somebody gets access to the shopping center. But this happens only if the society trusts the police. And the society trusts the police when police is not violent to those who are not protected. So this is the broader question. And we shouldn't look at those 2 hours. We have to look at the years of building trust.
In the second row, yeah. I can see the number of questions, so if we can keep the questions relatively brief, that would be helpful. So, yes.
Thank you very much, Olga, for your presentation. First of all, lots of respect for your work. And I know very well your work, and slightly respectfully disagree with your reasoning. By the way, I used to be a human rights lawyer and even considered and examined some of your applications which you submitted to the court. My question is, and actually this is something which is extremely important, and I try to understand, I explain to myself how it happened that hundreds of Russian judges who came to the European Court of Human Rights, who came to Strasbourg, they listened to lectures, they were fully in support of things the European Court actually did. Hundreds of judges, hundreds of prosecutors, they came. So lots of money, the Council of Europe and European Commission and lots of international organizations spent on educating Russian judges and prosecutors. And then just, and now it's heartbreaking when I see kind of, names of judges who actually now deliver judgments against people. Well, we know, yes, absolutely unjustified judgments. How it happened from your point of view and from probably this concept point of view? Thank you.
That's, from one point of view, it's easy to say that that was a waste of money. But, the system, it's a person. The system is created in such a way, and the judicial system is created in such a way that if a judge delivers a judgment that is not in the in the line with the judicial weird strategy of the court and overall authority line of understanding how the judgment should be fulfilled, he or she loses his position. And that's unfortunate example of choice, where people prefer to sustain with their salary, position, and privileges, but to betray human rights standard. That's a very unfortunate example, but I know a number of judges who left, who quitted their jobs because they didn't want to participate in that. But these are single examples of a personal courage, independence, dignity. But in general, it has been so few years when the people in my country could be, respecting themselves, that it wasn't enough. And I think this is also a sign of self-disrespect when you disrespect the ideals that you actually were supporting before, but choose your position, salary, and all this stuff.
The question towards the front here. You're allowed to ask, there. You're allowed to ask a question if you're on that side of the room as well. Just, it's not excluded.
Sorry, very briefly, could you just summarize the 3 mechanisms again that you think are a way of addressing these things, almost in bullet points, if I can.
Okay. There is nothing complicated. Evidentiary stubbornness, when you stick to evidence that you can't mirror. I mean, the traumas, the real evidences that are supported by the results of, let's say, investigation, public inquiry, anything. Coalition against across asymmetrics of the state attempts to challenge human rights norms. So global coalitions that speak the same thing and they speak about the same ideals throughout the globe, because ban on torture is the same everywhere and the ban on capital punishment should be the same everywhere, and there are simple messages to everybody. And naming the grammar. So teaching people to recognize mirror arguments and to see that this is something abnormal.
Okay, there's a question up there.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really exciting to listen to you. I'm asking because I hope I understood you correctly in this, that the people who are persecuting and fighting against these kind of things and the human rights violations that you've pointed out need to stay in the country. And if I understand it correctly, Crew Against Torture, as well as yourself, are still operating in Russia?
Yes, yes.
And I'd be really interested to hear how the day-to-day kind of operations work, how it is to kind of navigate the Russian system at the moment. Thank you so much.
That would be a long story, but long story short, we'll try to survive. I mean, for us, first of all, this is not about tactics or strategy, how you do it. This is first about your decision, what you do and how you do that. With the start of the war, when many human rights organizations left in exile, we decided that for us, it's more important to stay in the country because there is no way of supporting the torture victims, doing their investigations, accompanying them to courts and investigation bodies than to be in the country. And for me, for example, the best example ever was an example of a former wife of Maxim Gorky. Her name was Yekaterina Peshkova. They were never officially divorced, but they stopped living together when their son was about 1 year old. Yekaterina Peshkova had a human rights organization in Soviet Union that has collapsed only, I think, in the middle of the Second World War, and likely she was not persecuted because of Maxim Gorky, favorite writer of the regime, but she was a lawyer, and she was working with the cases of political prisoners because she was saying that I can't afford that the person faces the state all alone. I have to stand between a person and the state, and I will be staying there, and that's what our choice is as well. We want to stay between the individual and the state because if we leave, nobody will be standing in there. And she actually, speaking the truth, he didn't manage to save anyone from persecution, and all these political prisoners were sent to prison camps and gulags and everywhere. But she was fighting for everyone because she was also fighting for how they lived after they were arrested, that their kids have been educated, that the kids have been adopted by the families and not left in the orphans' houses, that they were receiving parcels with food and medication, that they were able to meet their family when they are released 10 or a dozen years after. So she literally didn't save anyone from the verdict, but she saved the souls of these people knowing that their kids are protected, that their relatives have medication and all these things. And I think that this is one of the best examples because actually we are not living through the same circumstances as Yekaterina Peshkova was living in the Soviet Union, maybe yet, but at least now that's easy.
Can I bring in a question from online and then I'll come to you? All around the world there seems to be backsliding in human rights. Are there any countries you'd pick up as really good examples where things are getting better?
Better? Well, not worse is already better. What I would say actually Costa Rica is very, maybe not the example that will come to the mind automatically, but Costa Rica is a really well-developing country in these terms, despite, the neighboring Nicaragua that is backsliding dramatically. I would say, well, Netherlands have always been one of the, best countries in terms of respect for human rights globally. They have problems, but in general, what has been done in the Netherlands since the 70s and 60s in regard of human rights protection and education of police officers and judges and all the state institutions gave an enormous result, actually. Yes, I would say, but the first place goes to Costa Rica because it's really hard to stick to democracy and human rights, being surrounded by not really democratic countries, but they're doing great, I think.
It's a fascinating country for lots of reasons,
Yeah.
but there's a question at the front row.
Yeah. First of all, it's really fascinating lecture. Thank you for this. And it made me think about so many setups and things, and how torture actually occurs, because it's extreme violence which comes out of fear, and then it works as control. So, for example, control of the state of individual. And then you see so many examples recently, like with the wars, like Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and then United States, the collapse. Well, the challenges of the judicial system right now. And well, I'm sort of talking extremist, as I came from Russia as an LGBT person before we all became extremist. And it's interesting to observe here in this country how things are moving in the wrong direction in places like very familiar to us in Moscow, the legislation about the public protests, which was applied on the famous lady who was held for 13 hours after she was, greeting the king. By mistake, but that was a new legislation. And as a mom of a trans daughter, I'm following the recent EHRC guidance here, which is very controversial because it's again one human rights being better than others. So rights of women, and it comes from a place of fear because they talk about safe spaces and whether trans people should be allowed into women-only safe spaces. So what's your view on that when you have two minorities? So when the one human right fights against the other from a place of fear, so how do you deal with that?
Well, there is no such a human right as fear. So fear is not an excuse for violating human rights. That's my position here. I mean, you can be afraid of many things, but the monsters are not under your bed. The monsters, kid, are inside yourself. You have to fight with the fear inside yourself, but not with those who are causing you fear, because it's not necessarily that they're dangerous.
Thank you. I think we may have to. I will give one final question here, but I do agree. Seeing human rights arguments being used to try to make false disputes is definitely a massive problem. We'll give the final question over to you.
Thank you so much. Again, great presentation, great talk. I just wanted to highlight one thing that maybe wasn't as prominent here, which is that a lot of people think about torture as violence, and we heard non-violent interrogations methods being mentioned, right? But there is also mental torture, which is much harder to address and much harder to collect evidence for. And I was wondering, do you think that, like, in this dystopian world, and potentially in Russia as well, or in some countries which even ratify the conventions, that's the direction they would be moving to, as in like implementing mental torture, and how would organizations address that?
Yeah, psychological torture is a very complicated thing, and an extremely complicated thing to prove because there are no physical tremors, you can't see that. And European Court for many, many years was very reluctant of delivering judgments related to psychological torture. But the first judgment that related to that was the case of Razvazhaev against Russia. That was Russian activist who was kidnapped in Ukraine and then brought to Moscow. He was not beaten. At that time, political prisoners were not beaten actually as a rule. But he was psychologically, he has survived psychological pressure because he has received a lot of threats related to his family, like his daughter will be kidnapped and raped, his wife would be killed. And this was extremely hard to prove, that there were testimonies from the others who heard it. And here it's also a question of collecting evidences. It's becoming easier and easier to prove because of the digitalization of the society. You have the records everywhere. Like 20 years ago, there were no cameras in the street, there were no, programs on phone that allows you to record voices and blah, blah, blah. So with the digital development, the ways of proving psychological torture has become more affordable, because here are the situation where you could link a certain action, like wording, for example, and a certain consequences of psychological condition of the person. Because without that, you have only psychological condition, and this could be challenged. But with the digitalization, we have a lot of problems with digitalization, spy programs, and face recognition system. But from another point of view, it allows you to collect information that allows you to prove psychological torture.
I think that may be all we have time for tonight. So thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Olga, for all the work that you do to try to fight for this, as well as for the talk tonight. Thank you, Irina, for arranging this and for bringing Olga here. So, please join me in thanking Olga and everybody who works with her for what they do.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here. I hope you will come to some of our other events. We have a couple of things through the summer, and then we'll be back in earnest when we get back to October. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, the rest of the week, and please do think about some of these issues as we go forward, because there is a fight to have if we're going to have those ripples of hope spreading out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.